The Silk Road is often imagined as caravans stretching across deserts, camel bells echoing under the burning sun. But hidden beyond those sands lay another Silk Road, one carved by the waves of the ocean. Here, ships carried not just silk, porcelain, and spices, but also faiths, languages, and entire cultures across the world's seas. It was a network of routes that connected Asia to Africa, Arabia to India, and even to the Mediterranean. Long before maps captured their true scale, these maritime pathways shaped civilizations, built empires, and left behind legacies that remain hidden in ports, ruins, and legends. Today, we sail into the forgotten story of the Maritime Silk Road, the sea lanes that changed the world. Chapter 1. The ocean roads begin, and the Maritime Silk Road began, where rivers met the sea. In bustling Chinese ports like Guangzhou and Quanzhou, ships loaded with silk, porcelain, and tea set out into the South China Sea, catching the monsoon winds. These routes were not simple paths, but intricate webs connecting Southeast Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Sailors navigated with stars, experience, and traditions passed down for generations. Unlike the dry deserts of the overland Silk Road, here, danger came from storms, pirates, and hidden reefs. Yet, the promise of wealth and discovery made every voyage worth the risk. The ocean became a living artery of global exchange. In time, these routes became more than trade lanes. They became cultural bridges. The Chinese shared their porcelain and gunpowder while returning with ivory, spices, and exotic woods from distant lands. Ports grew into cosmopolitan centers, buzzing with foreign tongues and dazzling goods. The seas tied together people who had never seen one another's lands, but who touched one another's lives through the objects they exchanged. A jar, a spice, a gemstone could travel thousands of miles, carrying stories with them. What made this ocean trade possible was the rhythm of the monsoon. Winds blew predictably, drawing ships out in one season and carrying them home in another. For centuries, this natural engine powered commerce across oceans, turning the Indian Ocean into the busiest waterway on Earth. Traders relied on its cycles as farmers rely on rain. The Maritime Silk Road was not an accident of human ambition alone. It was nature itself guiding humanity's hand, showing how wind and water could stitch together the edges of the known world. Chapter 2. The Ports of Exchange. At the crossroads of the seas lay ports that became empires in their own right. Cities like Malacca, Calicut, and Aden were not just stops. They were living worlds of trade and culture. Malacca, straddling the straits that linked the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, became the busiest hub in Southeast Asia. Here, Arab merchants rubbed shoulders with Chinese sailors, and Indian traders shared stories with Persian scholars. It was a city where religion, spices, and knowledge flowed like the tides. To rule such ports was to control the wealth of nations. Calicut on the Malabar coast was another jewel of the seas. Known for its pepper, Calicut attracted ships from every corner of Asia and beyond. Here, Hindu rulers welcomed Muslim merchants and temples stood alongside mosques. It was not simply a marketplace, but a meeting ground where cultures mingled. The rulers grew powerful by keeping the seas open, ensuring every trader could dock and deal in peace. This harmony gave Calicut its legendary prosperity, a symbol of what maritime trade could achieve. Aden, standing at the mouth of the Red Sea, was the gateway between Asia and Africa. Caravans from the African interior brought ivory, gold, and slaves, while ships from India and China brought silk and spices. Aden thrived not just because of trade, but because it was a cultural hinge, the place where continents met. The ports of the Maritime Silk Road were more than economic centers. Chapter 3. The Forgotten Kingdoms of the Sea. Along the ocean highways rose kingdoms that have faded from memory, yet their influence was immense. Srivijaya in Sumatra controlled the vital straits of Malacca for centuries. Ships could not pass without paying tribute. making Srivijaya a maritime empire that thrived not on armies, but on the wealth of the seas. Its rulers sponsored Buddhist monasteries, spreading faith across Southeast Asia. Further east, the Kingdom of Funan in Cambodia became another maritime powerhouse. Funan's rulers understood the sea's power, and they built canals to link inland wealth with the ocean. Merchants from India and China found themselves in Funan's harbors, trading in silk, gems, and spices. These encounters brought Hinduism and Buddhism into Southeast Asia, reshaping cultures forever. Funan was more than a kingdom. It was a cultural bridge between worlds. On the African coast, the Swahili city-states like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Zanzibar prospered. Their stone mosques and coral palaces stood as proof of wealth built on trade. Gold from Zimbabwe, ivory from the African interior, and slaves were carried across the seas to Arabia and India. In return, Chinese porcelain and Persian rugs filled African homes. The Swahili coast was proof that the Maritime Silk Road was not an Asian phenomenon alone. It was truly global, binding even distant Africa into the world's oldest international network. Chapter 4. The treasure ships of Zheng He in the early 15th century. The Chinese Admiral Zheng He commanded fleets that astonished the world. His treasure ships dwarfed European vessels, sailing as floating cities. They carried silk, porcelain, and gunpowder across the Indian Ocean, returning with spices, gems, and even giraffes from Africa. Zheng He's voyages were not merely trade expeditions. They were declarations of power, showing China's reach across the seas. Every port he visited remembered the grandeur of his fleet. In Calicut, his ships towered above the harbor. In Malacca, his envoys forged ties that would last generations. In East Africa, he left gifts and took home wonders unseen in China before. His voyages mapped the ocean and strengthened the Maritime Silk Road at its height. Yet, his story was later silenced. His ships dismantled, and China turned inward once more. But the echoes of his journeys still linger. Zheng He's voyages symbolized what the Maritime Silk Road could achieve: a peaceful network bound not by conquest, but by exchange. His ships carried not armies, but gifts, ambassadors, and ideas. If the overland Silk Road was a land of camel caravans, Zheng He's ocean roads were seas of sails, spreading China's presence across half the world. His story remains one of the greatest testaments to the power of maritime trade. Chapter 5. Cultural currents across the sea. The Maritime Silk Road was more than the movement of goods. It was the movement of culture. Buddhism, which originated in India, traveled across the seas and found new homes in Southeast Asia and China. Monks journeyed on merchant ships, carrying scriptures and relics, planting seeds of faith along the coasts. Over time, magnificent temples rose in places like Indonesia's Borobudur, testifying to the spiritual tide that flowed with the winds. Islam to spread across the waves. Muslim traders carried more than spices and porcelain. They brought the Quran, prayer, and a way of life. By the 13th century, Islam had taken root in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Swahili coast, shaping cultures for centuries. Mosques stood in busy ports, their minarets rising above markets filled with goods from 3 continents. It was trade that opened the doors, but faith that kept them alive. Even cuisine and language were transformed. The chili pepper, native to the Americas, reached Asia through maritime exchanges after Columbus. It became central to Indian, Thai, and Chinese cooking. Words too traveled. Arabic, Persian, and Sanskrit terms entered Malay and Swahili vocabularies. The Maritime Silk Road was not only a highway of wealth, but a tide of human identity. It reshaped how people prayed, spoke, and ate, leaving cultural fingerprints across oceans. Chapter 6. The science of the sea's trade across vast oceans required more than luck. It demanded science. Arab navigators perfected the use of the astrolabe, allowing sailors to determine their position by the stars. They recorded wind patterns and currents in detailed charts, passing knowledge across generations. Their mastery of navigation made the Indian Ocean the most reliable trade network of its age, centuries before Europe's seafarers set sail. Chinese innovations added to this maritime wisdom. The magnetic compass, first developed in China, guided ships safely across waters where stars could not be seen. Combined with advanced shipbuilding such as watertight bulkheads, Chinese junks could sail longer and safer than many other vessels. These technologies made voyages less risky, opening oceans to commerce and culture. Indian scholars too contributed, studying tides and monsoon patterns with precision. They passed this knowledge to Arab and Persian sailors, who brought it to Africa and the Mediterranean. Science flowed like trade itself, enriching all who touched it. The Maritime Silk Road was not simply a corridor of commerce, but a laboratory of human ingenuity. It was proof that the ocean was as much a teacher as it was a road. Chapter 7. Spices, Silk, and Medicine among the treasures of the sea routes. None were more desired than spices. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were worth their weight in gold in distant markets. Ships leaving Calicut or the Moluccas carried these fragrant riches across the oceans, feeding a demand so strong it shaped empires. A handful of nutmeg could decide fortunes. Silk, too, remained central. Chinese silk was prized in the Middle East and Europe, adorning kings and caliphs. But porcelain joined silk as China's other great export. Its beauty and durability made it a symbol of wealth across the Indian Ocean and into Africa. Archaeologists still uncover shards of Chinese porcelain on African shores, reminders of this oceanic connection. Medicine also sailed these waters. Indian and Arab physicians exchanged herbs, remedies, and medical texts. The seas became a channel not only for wealth but for healing. Ideas about health spread alongside goods, enriching knowledge across civilizations. Thus, the Maritime Silk Road was more than trade. It was a pharmacy, a treasure chest, and a bridge of knowledge all at once. Chapter 8. The Arab sailors were among the greatest masters of the Maritime Silk Road. From the Red Sea to the Swahili coast, they carried goods and ideas across waters they knew intimately. They relied on the stars, on their dhows with Lattian sails, and on generations of inherited wisdom. Their presence in ports from India to East Africa shaped the ocean's history. In Oman, Yemen, and beyond, entire societies revolved around the sea. Fishermen, pearl divers, and traders lived by its rhythms. Arab sailors became the middlemen of the seas, connecting China's porcelain with Africa's ivory, and India's spices with Europe's hunger. Through them, Islam spread widely. Mosques rose in coastal cities from Zanzibar to Malacca, blending seamlessly into the trade networks they built. Arab mariners were not conquerors, they were connectors. Their dhows carried not only goods but entire ways of life. Chapter 9. The African connections. Africa was a vital player in the Maritime Silk Road. The Swahili city-states along the East African coast were hubs of trade. From Kilwa to Zanzibar, they flourished by exporting gold, ivory, and slaves. In return, African markets filled with Chinese porcelain, Indian textiles, and Arabian glassware. African rulers grew wealthy, building stone palaces that testified to their power. Further inland, gold from Zimbabwe traveled to the coast, carried across rivers and savannas. The great stone city of Great Zimbabwe stood as proof of the wealth that flowed outward to the seas. Ships from Arabia and India anchored along the coast, carrying Africa's riches across the Indian Ocean. The continent was far from isolated. It was central to this maritime world. African culture too influenced the seas. The Swahili language, a blend of Bantu and Arabic, became the lingua franca of East Africa, spoken in ports and markets. African art and architecture absorbed foreign influences, but also gave back, shaping how trade centers looked and felt. The Maritime Silk Road was not just Asia's story, it was Africa's too, written in gold and stone, in language and faith. Chapter 10. Pirates and Perils of the Seas. The seas held wealth, and with wealth came danger. Pirates haunted the Maritime Silk Road, striking at merchant ships loaded with treasures. In the Strait of Malacca, in particular, piracy was constant. Storms, too, posed great risks. A single typhoon could sink entire fleets, scattering porcelain and silk across the seabed. Many wrecks discovered today tell the stories of ships swallowed by the sea. Even politics could threaten the routes. Wars between kingdoms could close ports, rerouting trade and reshaping history. Traders had to adapt constantly, choosing new harbors when old ones fell. The Maritime Silk Road was a world of opportunity, but also one of constant uncertainty. It tested the courage of every sailor who dared to ride the winds. Chapter 11. Europe enters the scene for centuries. Asian and African traders dominated the seas. But by the 15th century, European powers set their sights on these waters. Portuguese ships, led by Vasco da Gama, reached Calicut in 1498, breaking into the ocean's network. They came not to join the system, but to control it. The Portuguese seized key ports, disrupting the old harmony of trade. They demanded tribute, redirected commerce, and sought monopolies on spices. The seas, once free-flowing, grew tense under European pressure. Yet they could never fully control the vast web of routes. Asian and Arab traders adapted, continuing their traditions even under foreign eyes. Spain, the Dutch, and the English followed, each carving their place in the maritime world. By the 17th century, the Maritime Silk Road was changing. The old kingdoms declined and European empires grew. Yet, the foundations laid by centuries of Asian, Arab, and African sailors remained. Chapter 12. The Decline of the Maritime Kingdoms. As European powers rose, many of the old maritime kingdoms faded. Srivijaya, once master of the straits, was forgotten. Malacca fell under Portuguese, then Dutch, then British control. Calicut lost its prominence as Europeans built fortified trading posts along India's coast. African ports too changed. The Swahili city-states suffered as Portuguese ships attacked and redirected commerce. Their golden age ended, leaving ruins that still stand as silent witnesses of past glory. The once thriving centers of African trade were pulled into Europe's colonial grasp. Though diminished, the legacy of these kingdoms lived on. The cultural exchanges they fostered, the roots they established, and the knowledge they preserved continued to shape the world. The decline of maritime kingdoms did not erase their importance. It transformed them into the hidden foundations of a new global era. Chapter 13. The legacy in today's world, the Maritime Silk Road, may seem like a relic of the past, but its echoes remain. Ports like Singapore, Dubai, and Colombo stand where ancient harbors once thrived, carrying forward the same tradition of global trade. Cultural legacies to endure. Islam in Southeast Asia, Buddhism in Indonesia, Swahili along the African coast, all trace their roots to these ancient roots. Porcelain shards, old shipwrecks, and temple ruins remind us of the exchanges that shaped identities. The Maritime Silk Road is alive in the languages, religions, and cuisines of millions. Even geopolitics reflects this history. Modern initiatives like China's Belt and Road revived the spirit of the old sea routes. Nations compete for control of straits and harbors, just as they did 1,000 years ago. The Maritime Silk Road is not merely a story of the past, it is a blueprint still influencing our present. Chapter 14. Hidden Stories of the Seas. Beneath the waves lie countless shipwrecks, each a time capsule of the Maritime Silk Road. From Chinese junks off the coast of Indonesia to Arab dhows near Africa, archaeologists continue to uncover treasures of porcelain, coins, and spices preserved by the sea. Legends also cling to these waters. Tales of ghost ships, cursed treasures, and sea monsters followed sailors across the oceans. For many, the sea was alive, a force to be respected and feared. The hidden stories remind us that the Maritime Silk Road was not just trade, but human adventure. It was courage in the face of storms, hope in the promise of wealth, and wonder at the mysteries of the ocean. Chapter 15. The sea that shaped civilization, the Maritime Silk Road, was more than a network of trade. It was a force that shaped civilizations. It connected distant lands, blended cultures, and built empires without a single conqueror crossing them all. Its legacy is not found in monuments alone, but in the shared humanity it fostered. The ocean was the greatest bridge the ancient world ever knew. Through these routes, the world learned to be interconnected. Goods and ideas flowed like tides, showing that no land is truly isolated. The seas carried wealth, but also the knowledge that humanity thrives through exchange. Civilizations grew not by walls, but by waves. The Maritime Silk Road is a reminder that history is not only written on land, but also carved by the sea. It is the story of sailors and merchants, kings and monks, ports and storms. It is the story of how the ocean bound the world together. And it is a story still flowing in the waters we sail today. The sands of the Silk Road may capture our imagination, but the waves tell a story just as powerful. The Maritime Silk Road was the lifeline of civilizations, the secret current that carried goods, cultures, and ideas across continents. From the ports of China to the coasts of Africa, it wove the first threads of globalization long before the word existed. As we look at our world today, where oceans remain the highways of trade, we are reminded that the story of the sea is far from over. So next time you see a ship on the horizon, remember, it sails in the wake of ancient roots that once shaped the destiny of the world.